Welcome to Skin Earth Vitality, where ancient wisdom meets modern vitality. I'm Emily Davis, a holistic esthetician and herbalist. Join me as we unlock the secrets of ancient skincare practices, explore the beauty of seasonal living, herbalism, and true holistic well-being for you and the broader ecosystem. Hello, I'm so happy you're here with me today. Thank you for choosing to spend your time with me. It means so much. I want to invite you to take a deep breath wherever you're at, unclench your jaw, and settle into this container. Today is the second episode in a series that I'm doing all about demystifying skincare. This series is for you if you feel lost in the skincare aisle or if you feel dependent on somebody else's opinion on what you should use for your unique skin. And I always think it's a great thing to have a partner in a skin therapist, such as an esthetician. But I think it's great for you to be empowered with some basic skincare 101 knowledge, just so you can understand a little bit about the recommendations that are being made to you, and so that you can use your own discernment with their knowledge, and also so that we're not getting wrapped up in things that TikTok people are saying worked for them or what the person at Sephora is recommending. It's just so that you can have that empowerment when you're walking down the skincare aisle. I imagine this as like the magazine article that we all should have had when we were teenagers, teaching us the best way to go about skincare instead of, ads for St. Ives apricot scrub or Proactive with Kelly Clarkson telling us how great that was for her. And I just feel like many of us didn't get the basic foundation of how to look for skincare. And so that's what I want this series to be. Today's topic is about exfoliation. And this would be the second step in your skincare regimen. So last week's article was about cleansing. That's your first step. And that's not to say that every time you cleanse, right after that should be an exfoliant. Far from that. I hope that you walk away from this episode actually with an appreciation for less is more when it comes to exfoliation. But on the occasion that you do exfoliate, it will come right after your cleanser. So in today's episode, I'm going to talk about the lens that I see exfoliation with as a holistic esthetician who also practices a therapy called corneotherapy. I'm going to talk about what exactly exfoliation is and the structure of what's happening within the skin and how it also naturally sheds. I am going to talk about what variables slow down our natural skin sloughing process, which will make excess cells accumulate on the surface, making exfoliation a great option. I am going to talk about the role that hydration plays. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and give my disclaimer now. Nothing I say in this episode, in my online content, or in any future episode should be taken as medical advice. I'm an esthetician and an herbalist. I'm not a doctor, and it's your right and responsibility to always make sure that you are making the right choices for your body and not listening to somebody on the internet and taking that as the gospel that applies to your unique situation. With that out of the way, I will also be talking about the different types of exfoliation, the different types of products that you may come across. I will talk about how to determine how often you should exfoliate. And then finally, I'm going to finish with the medications that you may not be aware of that affect your skin and may potentially affect the frequency or type of exfoliation that you will use. So when it comes to exfoliation, my thoughts over my 17-year career as an esthetician have evolved. I definitely used to think it was priority number one for anyone with skin imbalances like acne or somebody who was interested in aging more gracefully or more vibrantly. I always thought exfoliation was priority one. And that's mostly because that's what was taught to me. That's what an aesthetics textbook would say. That's what a lot of conventional professional skincare lines and non-professional skincare lines will cram down your throat. And as I've evolved, as I've spent countless hours taking classes, reading articles, doing research, reading research studies, I have evolved my views and I've realized how important the surface cells actually are. And reframing my lens on exfoliation was really my first big unlearning I experienced from conventional beauty. And that, if you're a fellow esthetician listening, I think you'll appreciate how much of an identity crisis that was. Learning that so much of what I believed to be true and what I taught to my students when I was an aesthetics instructor and what I taught to my clients was maybe not my truth any longer. And that felt really uncomfortable. I had to humble myself and I had to come to terms with the fact that with new knowledge, it was necessary to make a shift. And I had to admit that to myself and then also the people that I had been giving advice to. And I do expect for this type of event to happen again and probably again after that over the span of my career in the future, which is why after this like big unlearning that I experienced in my career and realized I wasn't really living in my truth, that was also such a gift because it made me constantly want to look at and reassess my dogma. And I think also that just happens in our personal lives. I know that was a big part of the pandemic for me as well. And so I think that that's just a little lesson, little nugget in here is just always being able to reassess when we may have it wrong. And I mention all of this because if the lens that I'm viewing this with feels different than what you have seen before, I encourage you to be open-minded. I encourage you to take what feels good and leave the rest. Definitely the first time I heard some of these ideas that I'm going to discuss today, as I was a person who dermaplaned once a month without fail, as I was a person who definitely was using a glycolic acid toner a couple of times a week, I felt very triggered by these things because I was challenged. And so if that's you, if these things feel triggering, that's okay. That doesn't mean that you're wrong. It doesn't mean that I'm wrong. I just want to give you the information that I have so that you can move forward and make the best decision for you and your unique skin. So what is exfoliation? Simply put, exfoliation is the removal of surface skin cells. When viewed through the lens of a holistic skin therapist, such as myself, exfoliation is a delicate process that's really aimed at optimizing our skin barrier and maintaining natural balance. It's really about selectively removing quote unquote dead skin cells from the outermost layer, but it's without compromising the integrity. So I say quote unquote dead skin cells because are those skin cells on the surface really dead? I know that we hear this all the time, especially if you go to an esthetician. If you are an esthetician, that's kind of the rhetoric about what exfoliation is that it's taking off the dead skin cells. But I practice and am deeply intrigued by a philosophy of skin called corneotherapy. This was coined by the man who invented Retin-A, and it is a focus on protecting the integrity of the barrier. So I've talked about the barrier in past episodes. It's a three-layer, three-part barrier where it's a lipid layer, a microbiome, and a specific pH that makes it slightly acidic. So that's all together as one. And then directly below that, we have a surface layer of skin cells. So these skin cells are called corneocytes. Those are the quote unquote dead skin cells. And it's very common in conventional beauty to describe these as dead, but they're not entirely inert or inactive. These cells, think of them like little cornflakes on the surface of your skin, and they act as a barrier that actually protects us from the environment. So, a little bit of natural sun protection built in there, which is kind of funny to me that conventional beauty is constantly hammering in to wear sunscreen all day, every day, even when you're indoors. But also, you should be shaving off these surface cells that naturally protect us from the sun. It doesn't make a lot of sense. And when I learned that was part of the undoing of all of this and the beginning of my unlearning. They also help to prevent water loss. They can be a protection from unwanted pathogens. They contain what are called natural moisture factor. And so this is a component of the skin that attracts and retains water, which contributes to our skin's natural hydration level. And it supports our elasticity and our suppleness. They also provide an environment which supports the growth and balance of beneficial microorganisms. So this corneocyte layer, quote unquote dead skin layer, also helps to support what's above it, which is the microbiome. So they also are important because they talk to the cells down below. And this is so important. I spoke a little bit about cellular communication 2 episodes ago. But basically they're communicating, they're kind of like texting with each other all day, telling each other what's going on up at the surface. They're in charge. This conversation is in charge of inflammatory responses. It's in charge of how our skin is able to heal from wounds, including breakouts. So if our breakout response, if we're really slowly healing from a breakout, that could be because there's a disruption in the cell-to-cell communication, and taking off that surface layer is just going to disrupt that further. They also the cellular communication is also supportive to vibrant aging. So all of this to say, I am telling you that my best graceful aging secret is that I quit exfoliating my skin and taking these corneocytes off all the time. I literally only do it maybe once every 2 weeks, sometimes once a week. And I do it always with a very gentle method. So from a corneotherapy perspective, more aggressive modalities, including dermaplane, hydroderm, aka hydrofacial, microdermabrasion, traditional chemical peels, harsh scrubs, laser resurfacing, all of these are not supportive to the barrier layer of corneocytes, and it may actually cause harm to the skin down the road. I wrote an article on my Substack about why I stopped dermaplaning, and it was primarily after I learned about corneotherapy and the importance of these corneocytes, or those little cornflake cells on the surface. And I realized that I didn't want to shave them off anymore. So once again, if you're an esthetician, if you're feeling triggered by this, I get it. That is exactly how I felt the first time I heard someone talk about this, but just stay with me. I tried this on myself first before I said anything to my clients. And the first thing I noticed was that my skin texture over the following months improved drastically. And so that was like, okay, can't do this anymore. And when I started to just gently explain it to clients, I gave them the option. I just gave them the information. And then I said, this is the information. If you want to keep dermaplaning, that's fine. That's your prerogative. It's not my recommendation anymore. And 9 out of 10 people saw a huge improvement with their skin. So, with that being said, why should we exfoliate at all? And here's where some nuance comes in, because it's very easy to think, well, I shouldn't ever consider exfoliation at all after hearing all of that. And the fact is that our skin is constantly renewing itself. So let's just imagine for a moment that we are on this magic school bus. And if you can, as I'm talking about this, take a look at your skin and really visualize this. So you can imagine the skin cells. There's several layers of skin cells, and imagine them stacked on top of each other, these little singular cells stacked on top of each other like layered bricks. But these bricks are constantly migrating upwards as new cells on the bottom are created. And as they migrate upward, they're pushing off the old bricks. So it takes about a month for the bricks at the bottom to migrate to the top layers. And there's a natural chemical reaction within the skin where special enzymes called proteases and lipases work to break down the bonds that hold the cells together. So they're basically breaking down the mortar that's holding the bricks together. And this allows for the natural desquamation or the sloughing process to happen. So this is why we're not piles of dead skin cells, because our skin naturally sloughs off regularly. It's always every single day pushing those old bricks off as their mortar breaks down, and then they fall off and fly into your house and become dust that you need to vacuum up. So what impairs this natural shedding process that takes about a month? Aging is one thing. There's just a natural slowdown that happens as we age. Hormonal fluctuations, so a decrease in estrogen levels during periods of our life can influence and slow this desquamation or sloughing process. And then interestingly, increased androgen hormones can also influence this. It can generally also speed it up. And this is especially true during puberty, which is one reason why we may see an increase in acne, because we have excessive cells hanging out within the follicle. So another variable that can affect the speed of this sloughing process is dehydration. And that's because hydrated skin is better able to slough off dead cells naturally. Dehydration can reduce skin sloughing and lead to a buildup of cells. And that should also be considered with your environment. I'm just outside of Denver in Colorado, and it's incredibly arid here. And so it's very, very common that we have dehydrated skin here because of our environment. So that can lead to a buildup of cells if we're not properly hydrating our skin. And then finally, chronic stress and elevated cortisol levels, or I should say chronically elevated cortisol levels, can slow our natural sloughing process as well. So these are all cases where consistent, gentle exfoliation can be really helpful. And that doesn't mean every day. So I'll get into frequency here in just a little bit. But before I get into that, I want to talk a little bit about how you can naturally support healthy skin sloughing before you even reach for the product. And that's with hydration. Hydration is the biggest thing here, both internally and topically. Internally, you definitely obviously want to hydrate often because drinking water indirectly sends water to the skin cells through the bloodstream. And certain minerals, such as sodium and potassium, calcium, magnesium, these are all electrolytes. And electrolytes are essential for maintaining our fluid balance within our cells and throughout our body. They are going to help to regulate the movement of water and other substances into the skin cell membrane, so right into that skin cell. So making sure that you are getting adequate mineral intake in addition to drinking plenty of water is really important. And you can do this by adding electrolytes that don't have added sugar to your water. So there's a lot of, well, one in particular that's a big name that does have sugar in it. And so I wouldn't recommend that one, but there's also a lot of great electrolyte options that do not. So just be mindful when you're shopping for your electrolytes. You can also find this in my favorite way, which is an overnight herbal infusion. And so this would be with some type of what's called a nutritive herb. And this can be something like nettle or red raspberry leaf, oat straw, cleavers, violet. These are all really beautiful nutritive herbs that are very mineral rich. There's 100 others. Those were just the ones top of mind. You can purchase herbs like this through Mountain Rose Herbs is a great online option. I'll put my affiliate link to Mountain Rose Herbs in the bio. And you would just add like 1 tablespoon per cup of water to a jar, add some hot water, let it sit on the counter overnight. It takes overnight to allow for those minerals to extract from the herb. And they extract best in water. So this is better to do as this type of an infusion to sip on during the next day rather than a tincture, because alcohol doesn't do a very good job extracting minerals from plants. So I digress. I just really want to talk about herbs apparently, but that's a great way to get electrolytes and get minerals in your body. Bone broth is a wonderful way, coconut water, eating fresh produce. And I'll do a whole episode on hydration because it is like something that I super nerd out on. I love talking about this stuff. But I will briefly mention that there's a newish field of study about what's called structured water. And there's been some interesting work from a researcher named Jared Pollock, who has studied a theory of this fourth phase of water called structured water. So this phase is not solid, liquid, or gas, the three traditional forms of water that we've always heard about, but rather it's a gel. And in this form of water, it's very easily available to enter our cells. And so this water is in produce, it's in spring water, it's in glacial water. Infrared lights from sunlight first thing in the morning can structure the water that's in our body, which is why getting morning sunlight that's high in infrared rays is so important for your hydration. So I won't get into this a whole lot more right now because we're talking about exfoliation, but if you find this interesting, there's an awesome book called Quench by Dr. Dana Cohen and Gina Bria that I highly recommend. When I first picked it up, I was like, I don't need to read a book about how to drink water, but it blew my mind. It was so good. So all of that to say, it is wild how it's really, truly all connected. And water in the cell is a necessary part for the natural desquamation or sloughing process. We have to have water in order for those enzymes to break down the mortar between the bricks. And then topical application of water and other humectant ingredients is really important as well. And I'll talk about that a little bit more next week when I talk about hydrosols. But this will hydrate the corneocyte in the surface cells, and it can also support the enzymatic sloughing process. All right, so as far as products and treatments go, there are two main types of exfoliation. We have manual or physical exfoliation that are going to physically remove surface cells. And then we have chemical exfoliation, which is going to mean that there's a chemical reaction that happens that breaks down the bonds that hold the cells together. And so for manual or physical exfoliation, this would include a scrub, which is any type of a small particle that's being rubbed on the skin to remove surface cells. Dry brushing is a form of manual slash physical exfoliation. A physical cloth or a sponge, microdermabrasion, hydrodermabrasion, aka hydrofacial, dermaplaning, clay masks are a form of physical exfoliation, and also laser resurfacing. And then chemical exfoliation mainly includes enzymes and acids. And enzymes such as proteolytic enzymes found in fruits like papaya and pineapple, pumpkin is another popular one, sometimes cranberry. These target specific proteins, including the keratin that hold the cells together. So when we're breaking these bonds, we're facilitating a gentle slough of those surface cornflake cells off. And these proteolytic enzymes are just like the protease enzyme that I talked about, which was part of our natural skin sloughing. So this is just an exogenous protease that's found in fruits. So very similar to our natural process. And then we also have alpha hydroxy acids or beta hydroxy acids, which you might see on a skincare product on the label. Well, probably not in the ingredient deck like this, but you'll see it maybe in the name as an AHA or a BHA. And these work by dissolving both lipids and proteins. So there's like this glue that holds our cells together, and they dissolve that glue that holds them together. And what I'm not a huge fan of is that the acidic environment created by acid exfoliants may temporarily alter our skin's microbiome. And this can promote unwanted growth of bacteria or fungi. It can also inhibit growth of microbes that we do want there. And our microbiome is resilient, it can repopulate. But if you're doing this all the time, more than once a week, even once a week, you're not, in my opinion, you're not setting your skin's microbiome up for success. So, unlike acid exfoliation, which can alter the skin's pH and disrupt the skin's microbiome, enzyme exfoliation typically has a milder and more targeted effect on the skin. And so, this is why enzyme exfoliation is my personal go to. My other favorites include honey tapping. So, this is applying some type of a raw honey to the face, and then you start tapping on the skin, kind of like piano fingers. And this is going to be both an enzymatic because there's enzymes in the honey, but it's also going to be physical because as we're tapping, that stickiness of the honey with our fingers is physically pulling surface cells off the skin, but in a very gentle way. So, honey tapping is a great exfoliation, but I primarily go for it for lymphatic movement. It's one of my favorite things. If you are going out for the evening, try honey tapping a couple hours before, and it just instantly brightens your skin up. Clay is another favorite of mine. As the clay sits, it can help to physically lift away dead skin cells. Rice powder is another great option that I recommend. It's very gentle. It is both enzymatic and physical as well. And then really gentle scrubs like almond meal or something like that are a great option as well. I'm not a fan of really aggressive scrubs. It shouldn't be like a it hurts so good situation. So now that you have been presented with the information, I would invite you to consider what the right thing for your unique skin is. Remember that although our culture primes us to think this way, more is not better, harsher is not better, better is better. One of the issues that I have with the aggressive or over exfoliation message that we've received from conventional beauty in the past is the energy in which we approach it. Is this something we're doing to fix or abuse our skin back into compliance because it's been quote unquote bad? I think this is really important to take into consideration when you're deciding what you're doing to your skin. This intention is so crucial because your skin cells are listening to the subliminal messages you're sending to them. To find the right type of exfoliation and the best frequency for your unique skin, I would consider the climate that you live in. If you're in a arid climate like I am, you may consider exfoliating more frequently. And that would look like more frequently, in my opinion, looks like once a week. You want to consider your skin type and your skin conditions. So if you're drier, you may want to exfoliate. And then also considering that with acne specifically, this often is caused by a buildup of both oil and corneocyte cells that have accumulated in the follicle. And that's like a little tube in our skin, and the tube has surface skin cells as well. And so going back a little bit to chemical exfoliants, when we talk about beta hydroxy acids, we're primarily talking about salicylic acid. And so salicylic acid is really interesting because it's got the ability to go into the follicle and actually exfoliate the cell wall inside of the follicle, whereas other exfoliation will generally just be on the surface and it can't always penetrate down into that tube. And so there are plants that have natural salicylates, so similar to salicylic acid. And these include willow, meadowsweet, poplar, and then also oats have a natural salicylic. And so, for example, like a colloidal oat paste, which is just oat flour or ground oats, could be a really lovely exfoliation that's a little bit more gentle. But maybe beta hydroxy acid, maybe salicylic is the right choice for you. That's your prerogative, but those are just some other options. You also want to consider everything else that you're doing to your skin and other medications. So, really quickly, I'm going to touch on vitamin A and its derivatives. And I'll do a whole episode on vitamin A as an ingredient because vitamin A is an amazing antioxidant. I'm not crazy about all of its synthetic derivatives, and it's certainly not for everyone. However, if you are using retinol, retinaldehyde, retin-A, also known as tretinoin, if you're using isotretinoin or adapalene, which is also known under the brand name Differin, you definitely want to pay attention here because this is also important to consider with your exfoliation. Synthetic vitamin A derivatives are also called retinoids, and they're not technically an exfoliant. Retinoids stimulate skin cell turnover and promote the growth of new cells so that more on the top are being pushed off. So, in this sense, it is increasing the desquamation or the sloughing, but the product itself is not actually removing the dead skin cells or breaking down the bonds between the cells like an exfoliant would. However, it's really important to be cautious of what it's doing because if you're also if you're also exfoliating, you could be overdoing it with both. So that can be pretty disruptive to the skin. And you generally want to, for sure, avoid exfoliating on the same day as you're using a synthetic vitamin A like a retinol. And I personally would be extremely gentle with my exfoliation if I were also already using a retinoid. And that's all to say, again, this is through my holistic corneotherapeutic lens. Other medications or other things that you want to consider when you're considering what your exfoliation lifestyle looks like. I'll just name off all of the medications that can cause inflammation, potentially photosensitivity, or make your skin more sensitive to exfoliation. So, topical or oral corticosteroids, these can lead to skin thinning. I'll do a whole episode on topical steroids and topical steroid withdrawal. But this can make the skin more fragile. Benzoyl peroxide, antibiotics, antifungal medications, chemotherapy drugs. If you're on any type of a chemotherapy, this is not a time to do a lot of exfoliation. Immune suppressing medications that are used to manage autoimmune conditions or prevent organ rejection can weaken our skin's immune response and increase its susceptibility to irritation. Hormonal medications like oral contraceptives or hormone replacement therapy can make our skin more sensitive, certainly more photosensitive. Antihistamines that can increase skin dryness and sensitivity. And then antidepressants especially SSRIs might have side effects that affect skin health, including dryness or photosensitivity. So today's episode got into a lot of different things. It was longer than I originally anticipated it to be, just like the cleanser episode was. But I hope that you're walking away from this with some ideas that can help you to determine what's best for your skin. I talked about the lens that I see exfoliation through, and that it is going to be different than a conventional beauty therapist. I talked about the structure of what's happening in our skin when it naturally sheds and the variables that may slow this down. I talked about the role that hydration plays, the different types of exfoliation, how to determine how often you should exfoliate. And then I finally finished up with the medications that you may want to consider for your exfoliation lifestyle. So, with all of that said, so, if you liked this episode, please consider subscribing, rating, and reviewing, and share it with a friend who you think would enjoy it. Tune into my podcast, Skin Earth Vitality, next week as we talk about hydrosols, skin tonics, and serums. I hope you have a beautiful week. Be well.